Ecosystem after system is plundered and laid to waste us from the earth.
The religion of economics. The fact that economics, the most pious religion that the world has ever known, has managed to audaciously disguise itself as secular is the real key to its unprecedented success. Not only secular, but a science. Not just a science, but the only one of the social sciences hard enough to have its own Nobel Prize. I propose that the first step to killing this false god and freeing the earth from its thrall is to unmask it, to name it, to say it as it is. So here I will tell the story of this strange religion, one whose Sabbath lasts 5 days out of 7, while for the truly devout, maybe 6 or even 7 days are spent worshipping in huge complexes of temples that scrape the sky, foul the waters, and scorch the earth. When not in their office temples, the pious congregate in malls to shop unto exhaustion of the spirit and of the earth itself. I've spent over 40 years working on the conservation of nature and have long been troubled by the irrationality, indeed insanity, that destroys the biological fabric from which our own lives are woven. Although our actions to protect the Australian rainforests between 1979 and 1986 led to a stream of national parks in New South Wales, Tasmania and Queensland, during those first half of the 1980s, when those blockades were taking place, worldwide, for every forest that was saved, 1,000 forests were lost. And clearly there's no way to save the planet one forest at a time. Unless we can address the underlying disease that allows modern humans to imagine that we can profit from the destruction of our own life support systems, clearly these actions will be of no particular consequence as far as the future of the world is concerned. James Lovelock said that it's as if the brain were to decide it's the most important organ in the body and started mining the liver. Paul Ehrlich pointed out that we are sawing off the branch that we're sitting on. These clearly point to a psychological problem. I believe that the best understanding of the psycho-spiritual dimension of the environmental crisis is to be found in a philosophy called deep ecology. The term was coined by the late Arne Næss, Professor of Philosophy at Oslo University, and according to Næss, underlying all of the symptoms of the environmental crisis is the illusion of separation between human beings and the rest of the natural world. And he claimed this illusion of separation was itself a result of anthropocentrism, or human-centeredness, the idea that human beings are the centre of everything. So to anthropocentrism, we are the crown of creation, we are the measure of all being. The world consists of human beings on the one hand and resources for human beings on the other hand. The strongest root of this anthropocentrism is in the Judeo-Christian tradition, where only man was created in God's image, only humans have a soul, and we are enjoined to subdue and dominate nature, and nature is to be in fear and trembling of us. If we dig at the foundations of classical economics, we discover its Judeo-Christian roots. Nothing has any value until humans add their labour and intelligence to it. The earth itself is just dirt until we turn it into something. It has no value. The only thing that has intrinsic value are human beings. Everything else may have instrumental value if it's a resource for human beings. Contemporary economics is an utterly anthropocentric project. Just as Christianity and Islam usurped the sacred sites and holy days of the pagan religions they overthrew, now Christianity has been overthrown by its own offspring. A case in point is the transformation of St. Nicholas, a 4th century saint, into Santa Claus, a modern and postmodern god of consumerism. What used to be the solstice was subsumed by Christmas, and this in turn has been swallowed by shopping. Harvey Cox, Professor of Divinity at Harvard University, writes that Disagreements among the traditional religions are trivial in comparison with the fundamental differences they all have with the religion of the market. Will this lead to a new jihad or crusade, he asks? I doubt it. It seems unlikely that traditional religions will rise to the occasion and challenge the doctrines of the new dispensation. Most of them seem content to become its acolytes and to be absorbed into its pantheon, much as the old Nordic deities, after putting up a game fight, eventually settled for a diminished but secure status as Christian saints. He points out that the market religion has maintained the sacrament while reversing it. Sacred things, land, water, air, and even the human body, are transformed into profane ones so they can be commodified and put up for sale, that is, transubstantiation. The willed, but not yet achieved, omnipotence of the market means that there is no conceivable limit to its inexorable ability to convert creation into commodities. In the mass of the market, a reverse process occurs. Things that have been held sacred transmute into interchangeable items for sale. Land is transformed from the sacred into mere real estate. We are shocked at the ancient Eastern Islanders who cut down every last tree to build and transport their lifeless gods of stone. Yet in our blind devotion to the god of economy, we repeat their insanity on a truly planetary scale. Only a deeply religious faith allows us to ignore the absurdity of perpetual growth on a finite planet. Most students of the religious phenomenon of economics see neoclassical economics as a false theology, and I will provide more excerpts from some of their analyses. But first, I will introduce the curious case of economist Robert Nelson of the University of Maryland, who celebrates the religious aspects of his discipline. Nelson disagrees with his profession's wish to think of itself as a science, claiming rather that economists are really more like theologians, which gives them a much more important role in society. Economic efficiency has been the greatest source of social legitimacy in the United States for the past century, he writes, and economists have been the priesthood defending this core social value of our era. Nelson acknowledges many flaws in classical economic thinking and concludes that whatever one might say today of the genuine truth value of economics as a body of scientific understanding, the practical reality is that the economics profession for many years was successful in asserting its scientific status. The economic priesthood could effectively police the theological territory of America. While, as we shall see below, many scholars agree wholeheartedly with his claim that without certain theological assumptions, some of the most important conclusions of economic theory could not be sustained, unlike Nelson, most of these scholars use this conclusion to debunk economics rather than exalt it. David Lloyd gives us the most compelling of the many critiques of economic religion in his Religion of the Market in 1997. He sensibly warns us that Nelson could be said to have overlooked the market religion's sacrificial aspects of worsening global poverty and environmental degradation, and points out that in 1960, countries of the North were about 20 times richer than those of the South. In 1990, after vast amounts of aid, trade, loans, and catch-up industrialisation by the South, North countries had become 50 times richer. The richest 20% of the world's population now have an income about 150 times that of the poorest 20%, a gap that continues to grow. The world's 2,153 billionaires have more wealth than the 4.6 billion people who make up 60% of the planet's population. The richest 1% bag nearly twice as much wealth as the rest of the world put together over the past 2 years. A tax of up to 5% on the world's multimillionaires and billionaires could raise 1.7 trillion a year, enough to lift 2 billion people out of poverty. The market religion's sacrificial aspects. We might imagine that this situation arises somehow accidentally an unanticipated contingent effect of the economic religious structures that rule the world. A closer inspection, however, reveals a much more sinister picture. It turns out that in order to generate obscene profits, Goldman Sachs, Deutsche Bank, Merrill Lynch and others have caused the starvation of some of the poorest people in the world. In 2007, staple food prices started inexplicably rising, and another 200 million people, mostly children, couldn't afford to get food anymore and sank into malnutrition or starvation. There were riots in more than 30 countries, and at least one government was violently overthrown. It wasn't through a fall in supply. Wheat production actually rose globally that year. Then, in the spring of 2008, prices just as mysteriously fell back to their previous level. In April 2008, Jean Ziegler, the UN Special Reporter on the Rights to Food, called it a silent mass murder, entirely due to man-made actions. And we have a herd of market traders, speculators and financial bandits who have turned wild and constructed a world of inequality and horror, he said. The god of the market's hunger for sacrifice would put the god of the Aztecs to shame. Here's how it works. Throughout the 20th century, farmers have had mechanisms, futures markets, whereby they could insure themselves against crop failure or the collapse of prices. Throughout the 90s, Wall Street traders lobbied for the abolition of the regulations that had hitherto restricted these mechanisms so that only those directly involved in food production could use them, and suddenly these contracts were transformed into food speculation derivatives that could be traded without reference to the foodstuffs themselves. Previously, the economic system of supply and demand ensured that only 1 billion people went to bed hungry. After this deregulation, the cost of food was determined by the value of speculative food contracts, not by the availability of food itself. Jayati Ghosh is a professor of economics at the JNU in New Delhi. Asked if this bubble that is being was a bubble being deliberately created by finance, she replied, "Yes, absolutely. There is no other way to put it. You have a massive expansion. It sounds incredible, but world rice prices increased by 320% between January 2007 and June 2008. So in just 18 months, you have a tripling of world rice prices. World wheat prices go up by 240%, maize prices by 218%. Crazy increase in the trade prices in these commodities." Professor Ghosh points out that the price of other worldwide crops, which are not traded on the futures markets, like millet and cassava, rose very little in 2007. Her research shows that speculation was the main cause of the rise. John Hari explains it thus. In 2006, financial speculators like Goldman's pulled out of the collapsing US real estate market. They reckoned food prices would stay steady or rise while the rest of the economy tanked, so they switched their funds there. Suddenly, the world's frightened investors stampeded onto this ground. So while the supply and demand of food stayed pretty much the same, the supply and demand for derivatives based on food massively rose, which meant that all rolled into one price shot up and the starvation began. The bubble only got burst in March 2008 when the situation got so bad in the US that the speculators had to slash their spending to cover their losses back home. And this is a quote from this professor in New Delhi. "The world's wealthiest speculators set up a casino where the chips were the stomachs of hundreds of millions of innocent people. They gambled on increasing starvation and won. Their wasteland moment created a real wasteland. What does it say about our political and economic system that we can so casually inflict so much pain?" Perhaps this is what Loy was pointing to when he cautioned in his understated way that Nelson could be said to have overlooked the market religion's sacrificial aspect. In 2009, in order to prevent recession, the failure of the deity to grow, some governments initiated a stimulus, a sacrifice propitiating the god. In Australia, this was done by giving every taxpayer $900 in the hope that if enough people spent this mollifying the god, then the god would be merciful and begin growing again. When the god gets wrathful, he stops growing, we get depressed, people lose their jobs, which provides them with the wherewithal to shop, to participate in the religion. One is reminded of John Steinbeck's book, The Grapes of Wrath, the conversation between the agents for the bank and the poor shit-kicker Dust Bowl tenant farmers whose land they were repossessing on the bank's behalf. As though the bank were a monster, because these creatures don't breathe air, they breathe profits. They eat the interest on money. If they don't get it, they die the way that you die without air. The monster has to have profits all the time. It can't wait, it'll die. When the monster stops growing, it dies. It can't stay one size. We're sorry, it's not us, it's the monster. The bank isn't like a man. Yes, but the bank is only made of men. No, you're wrong there, quite wrong there. The bank is something else than men. It happens that every man in a bank hates what the bank does, and yet the bank does it. The bank is something more than men, I tell you. It's the monster. Men made it, but they can't control it. It's not just the professors of economics who see the religious nature of the discipline. Some professors of religion come to the same conclusion. J. McDaniel, a professor of religion from Arkansas, suggested that the dominant faith system of our times contains the complete ecclesiastical apparatus, a priesthood, the economists, whose formulaic mumbo-jumbo nobody really understands, but almost everyone trusts to be effective. A missionary organisation in the form of the advertising industry, preaching the gospel of salvation through consumption. And the church, the shopping mall, where the rituals of the faith are carried out. The ethics of this faith system are summed up by the belief that the highest virtue is to shop. The contamination of soul, society and soil by the corruption that is economic thinking are so pernicious, possibly terminal. What are we to do? It's not much use pointing fingers or being holier than thou. Hardly a modern person is exempt from this religion, for even if we are not active in the congregation, still all of us are members of the sect as we drive our carts towards oblivion with their attendant inevitable emissions and paving over of the land. All of us are fouling the earth. Yes, some have their hands on bigger triggers, but we are all in this psychotic trance together. I would like to conclude by briefly exploring some possible avenues whereby we might respond and fight back. I believe that we need a philosophical or religious movement to unmask these insidious powers, a hearts and minds campaign to which we apply the same fervour that we bring to bear in our campaigns to protect a special place or an endangered species, for no place or species is safe from the scorched earth policies of this God. Bringing all the force of metaphor and poetry to this struggle, we will throw the money-lenders out of the temple of the immaculate biosphere. We must defrock economics, strip it of plausibility, rescind its Nobel Prize, publicly humiliate it, and provoke laughter at the posturings of both the naked emperor and his servile, obsequious courtiers. I've been thinking about this for a while, and I was going to play the World Bank song, which I wrote in 1995 when I was first started thinking of these things, but we have certain technical hitches, and so Peter's filming this, and the recording of this, which will be, I'll send you all a link to, if you give me your email, we'll include the World Bank song.
Emanating from expensive business suits, do you notice odors foul and rank? With these ecocide, genocide numbers game, here comes the World Bank. Vampire needle dripping dollars, clutching his structural adjustment knife. Ecosystem after system is plundered and laid to waste as from the earth he sucks the life. Secret vital organs from the living earth, spitting out cellulose chips. How generous he greases all his minions' palms, his coffee's ecological collapse. Economists from hell, smooth the way, run interference, quelling all your fears. With administrators, bureaucrats, just doing my job, and all those damn engineers. World Bank's got an evil junkie wife, goes by the name of IMF, shoots up biological diversity, dispenses cultural death, mumbling about sustainable development. She plies her vicious trade, and if you see her coming, better run for your life. There's an S on the end of her A. Asian, African, American development banks are World Bank's ugly cronies three, with their friends the scumbag loggers from the FAO and the mafia from the UNDP. They loot the biological register with their tropic forest action plan. Scorched earth transmigration, chemicals, agribusiness, logging mines and dams. Propping up corrupt third world elites, choke the rivers with endless dams. Keeping all them foreign experts employed with their paid for by your taxes scams. Rape the earth to meet the interest payments, it's that same old shell game. Centuries of exploitation, and they still owe us colonialism by another name. The time has come to clean up this town, name names, flush out those crooks. Biological fabric in tatters, the World Bank crooks the books. Wake up now, won't you hear the cries of this planet of your birth? Expose the lies, no compromise in defense of Mother Earth. I said stop the lies, no compromise in defense of Mother Earth. Needle dripping dollars, clutching his structural adjustment knife. Ecosystem after system is plundered and laid to waste as from the earth he sucks the life. Teeth with vital organs from the living world, spitting out cellulose chips. How generous he greases all his minions' palms, his coffee's ecological collapse. Economists from hell, smooth the way, run interference, quelling all your fears. With administrators, bureaucrats, just doing my job, and all those damn engineers. World Bank's got an evil junkie wife, goes by the name of IMF, shoots up biological diversity, dispenses cultural death, mumbling about sustainable development. She plies her vicious trade.
When we see economics as religion, then advertising becomes religious education, and I believe that a critique of advertising is a strategic place to begin a campaign to undermine the religion. In her essay, Small Wonder, Barbara Kingsolver informs us that puppeteers of globalised commerce fund their advertising each year with more than $100 spent for this planet's every man, woman and child. One often hears the argument that there's nothing we can do about greed, about the constant desire to purchase more and more stuff to fill the gaping hole in our souls, because this is only human nature. But if this is so, why the need to spend more money worldwide on the hypnotic deluge of religious indoctrination to reinforce this sickness than on all other education combined? More than $800 billion a year to reinforce greed and placate the economic god. To this we must add the free advertising which sustains this paradigm, the hypnotic litanies in every news broadcast telling us endlessly of the vagaries of the stock markets, of the minute rises and falls in the relative values of various world currencies. What are we to make of this? How come no one complains of the stupefying boredom and uselessness of this information? We are like force-fed beasts, consumed by consumption, living matrix batteries whose life purpose is to ensure that the god of economics remains fed and warm. The work of exposing and deconstructing the calamitous role of advertising is well underway. Adbusters magazine has been doing a great job of stripping the emperor of the veils of illusion behind which he hides. The Story of Stuff by Annie Leonard provides a very popular online analysis, while Reverend Billy of the Church of Life After Shopping wittily thumbs his nose at the false god. But these are tiny beginnings and the hour is getting late. We need to build these beginnings into a movement that redefines what it means to be successful, what it means to be abundant. Fueled by advertising, we dig the earth up and chop it down to make the goods which we can stuff into that great big hole where our souls used to be, each item promising that this time it's going to work. Buy me and you'll finally feel all right. But do we know anyone who has ever reached the end of this particular path, has finally brought that one last thing that finally resolved for them the utter catastrophe of the human condition? Far from it. What we find is that the more that you feed this addiction, the more addicted you become. It has long been recognised that GNP is a distorted measure of value. The more motor accidents we have, the more the GNP goes up. The more anti-pollution equipment we are forced to manufacture, the stronger the economy, etc. As far back as 1992, Alan Durning wrote that comparisons that have been made over time between societies show that there is little difference between self-reported happiness. The fact that we are in the developed world are now consuming so much more does not seem to be having much effect on our happiness. Paul Gilding points out that this is now well established with solid global data. What this data shows in comprehensive global studies is that happiness and life satisfaction go up sharply when you go from poverty to an income of between 10 and 20,000 per person per year. Then it stops. It levels out and stays there no matter how much more income you get. Though some studies suggest if you get really stinking rich, it goes down again. If you want to understand the numbers, check out the excellent report, Prosperity Without Growth. An interesting article in The Guardian in April 2010 was titled Beyond Green Growth, Why We Need a World Without Economic Growth, and explored the idea that beyond concepts of green growth, of sustainable growth, there is also that of no growth. The New Economics Foundation has come up with the Happy Planet Index, which shows the relative efficiency with which nations convert natural resources into long and happy lives for their citizens. The nations at the top of this index are those achieving long, happy lives without overstretching the planet's resources. Costa Rica comes first. 9 of the top 10 nations are in Latin America. China is 20th, India 35th. Not a single European country made it into the top 50. I'm proud to announce that Australia, number 102, beat both the USA, 114, and Nigeria, 115. Arnie Ness says that ecological ideas aren't enough to save us. What we need is ecological identity, ecological self. He proposes that community therapies will lead us to this ecological identity and dissolve the illusion of separation from the natural world. He says that a sense of responsibility is a treacherous basis for conservation, that if we conserve nature because of our altruism, because we are good people, alter implies the other. It means that nature is still other than our very self, and it means it hides from us the fact that the nature out there and the nature in here are one and the same, are continuous. So that once we have that as an experience rather than merely as intellectual knowledge, then mere self-defense is all that's required in order to protect nature. We no longer need to be good. We no longer need to have a sense of duty or altruism. Arnie Ness says that the requisite care flows naturally if the self is widened and deepened so that the protection of free nature is felt and conceived of as protection of our very selves. That is, it's no use sacrificing our desire for ever more material junk. We have to stop wanting these things, stop finding them pleasurable rather than bravely foregoing their pleasures. Like with any addiction, we must ask, what is the real underlying problem? What is it we're not facing up to and avoiding by our consumption habits? All this intersects with deep ecology around the question of value. The economic cost-benefit analyses invariably decree that the benefits of laying nature to waste trump the costs because, in an extraordinary feat of transubstantiation, the only things of real value, such as air, water, soil and life itself, are deemed to be worthless, while social fictions such as money are pronounced to be real. This is a religious miracle of breathtaking power which makes the parting of waters or turning water into wine pale into insignificance. It's not enough to tear down the false god. We need a spiritual movement which replaces the false promises of the Church of Greed with something which really does feed us. That is, alongside the demolition of the false religion of economics, at the same time, the true religion of the sacred cosmos needs evolving. A return to a mystique of the earth is a primary requirement for establishing a rapport between humans and earth. Only in this context will we overcome the arrogance that sets us apart from all the other components of the planet and establishes a mood of conquest rather than of admiration. To assume that conquest and use is our primary relation with the natural world is ultimate disaster. Here we may find guidance in the work of Thomas Berry. Father Thomas Berry, who died in 2009, was a Catholic priest who found in the middle of life that he had turned from being a theologian to becoming a geologian. His attention turned from the God that he'd always worshipped, the Christian God, to the realisation that that God, like everything else, was a product of the earth itself, and the earth became the object of his spiritual life. The student of Teilhard de Chardin, he proposed that a deep understanding of the history and functioning of the evolving universe is a necessary inspiration and guide for our own effective functioning as individuals and as a species. He gives us confidence that in spite of the vast momentum of the anthropocentric project and the colossal success of the economic god, sanity may yet prevail. He writes, "If the dynamics of the universe from the beginning shaped the course of the heavens, lighted the sun and formed the earth, if this same dynamism brought forth the continents and seas and atmosphere, if it awakened life in the primordial cell and then brought into being the unnumbered variety of living beings, and finally brought us into being and guided us safely through the turbulent centuries, there is reason to believe that this same guiding process is precisely what has awakened in us in our present understanding of ourselves and our relation to this stupendous process. Sensitised to such guidance from the very structure and functioning of the universe, we can have confidence in the future that awaits the human venture." So this is the first time I've given this presentation. It was based on the research that I did for a chapter that I wrote in 2011 for a book called Social Ecology, published by the University of Western Sydney. And the reason that I've dusted it off and sharing it with you is because lately I've become interested in the machinations of a group called the Atlas Foundation, and it reminded me of all of these things. So back in November, I was one of 109 people who were arrested at the kayak blockade in Newcastle of the Hunter River, where rising tide stopped coal ships for 30-some hours from leaving that port. The port of Newcastle is the largest coal port in the world, and more than 1% of all of the world's greenhouse gases are shipped out of that port. And so more than 3,000 people came to that protest. It was quite incredible. 109 of us were arrested. And while I was in the holding pen waiting to be processed, first time I'd been arrested in 25 years, but I found it's like riding a bike, you know. While I was there, I ran into some extinction rebels from South Australia who invited me to a protest happening 2 days hence in Sydney opposite Parliament House in Macquarie Street, where they were doing a protest outside one of those skyscrapers in Macquarie Street, and on the first floor there was the Centre for Independent Studies. So I went along and handed out leaflets while these brave women threw eggs full of paint up at the first floor windows and graffitied the pavement and the windows of the building before they were arrested. And reading the leaflets that I was handing out, I found out about the Atlas Foundation, where they run between 500 and 600 think tanks around the world, and the Centre for Independent Studies is one of a dozen or so in Australia. More than $800 million a year in funding goes to these think tanks, funded by Nobel, Exxon, Shell, Gina Rinehart, Rupert Murdoch, all the suspects are behind it. And the purpose is to pollute the information landscape so that there's the appearance of controversy where no controversy is possible any longer, where they'll find a scientist in some other discipline who's got a bee in his bonnet about something, and they'll publish the hell out of him and make it look as if there's still doubt, where there's the most solid scientific consensus that the world has ever known now, but they're unwilling to stop, digging the world up and tearing the world down and, sliding us into oblivion. The Atlas Foundation is behind it. And that's why I've felt that there's no way that Rising Tide is going to succeed in building the social movement that they rightly believe is the only thing that's going to be able to stand up to those vested interests. Is a powerful social movement, and until there's a level playing field, until the disinformation campaigns, it's interesting because as I came out of the underground station at Martin Place in Sydney to go to this action, there was a much bigger demonstration going out in the street, and it was a bunch of irate farmers from Yass demonstrating against wind farms. And the leaflets that they were handing out contained paragraphs which were word for word identical with similar leaflets in Canada and in other countries. That, it's exactly the same playbook that's being used to manipulate people, and the same lies are being told everywhere. And so I just feel like, that it just reminded me of the God of economics, and that there was a great action in Melbourne, I think only a month ago. Again, it was Extinction Rebels had Atlas Lies, Planet Dies. Was anyone here at that action? I saw it on TV anyway, and so I just thought that I would like to introduce the God of economics as a sort of, and the latest incarnation in the Atlas Foundation. So with there, I'd just like to hand it over to questions or discussion. What do you reckon?
Can you tell us more about the Atlas Foundation?
Well, I had a bunch of slides from with that information on it, but yes, I do have some more here.
I can project them. I've got them. I can project them up there.
Well,
PowerPoint or
yeah, okay, give it a try.
Yeah.
Let's see.
We'll just turn that back on.
I looked them up and I saw a children's rugby charity.
I'll just give it a moment. Warm up.
Yeah, like a cover.
So the leaflets that I was handing out were eviction notices to the Centre for Independent Studies, evicting them from the building, and the grounds for eviction were running a decades-long disinformation racket masquerading as a research institute. dressing up climate denial to look like respectable scholarship, acting as a key node of the oil and gas funded Atlas network while claiming to be independent, demanding equal airtime for extreme neoliberal talking points despite the total absence of popular support for your opinions, cloaking oligarchy in the language of freedom. Extinction Rebellion's Facebook post put it thus: "Our brave rebels caused mayhem today at the action at the Centre of Independent Studies in Sydney, the fossil fuel-backed right-wing think tank affiliated with the shadowy global Atlas network. A small but determined group of activists spray chalked messages in the foyer and on the buildings at 131 Macquarie Street, where CIS is based, and put up mock eviction notices. One rebel, May Guyen, was arrested. The Atlas Network's primary purpose is to create and spread propaganda to undermine any group, individual or idea that poses a threat to the interests of the fossil fuel industry. Funded with grant money supplied by Santos, Shell, BHP, Rio Tinto, Western Mining Corporation and News Corp, the CIS is a key Australian node of the Atlas Network. Through aggressive lobbying and slimy tactics like paying self-declared experts to write misleading scientific papers, push polling and astroturfing, the Atlas Network has helped set back necessary action on climate change to such a degree that we are now in a full-blown climate crisis. People need to know the truth about the Atlas Network and how these think tanks are undermining our democracy and our survival. We have been systematically lied to, misled and manipulated over issues that are of critical importance to our survival on this planet, all for the sake of mega profits for an industry that should no longer exist. We need a worldwide eviction of these destructive information factories. It's time to stop believing Atlas lies and open our eyes.
Ecosystem after system is plundered and laid to waste us from the earth. He sucks the life.
Welcome to the Rainforest Information Centre, protecting rainforests in partnership with Indigenous communities and local people to safeguard these vital ecosystems. Join our mission to protect rainforests. Your support makes a difference. Don't miss out on the opportunity to learn more about our work. Help us save the Earth's remaining rainforests. Visit johnseed.net today.